While organizing my childhood bedroom, I never thought I would discover a letter that would completely alter my life. Emily is my name. I believed I fully knew my function and status within my family up to that point. I was the trustworthy, accountable one. I felt that I was meant to be my stepsister Sandy's backbone as she pursued her goal. While organizing my childhood bedroom, I never thought I would discover a letter that would completely alter my life. Emily is my name. I believed I fully knew my function and status within my family up to that point. I was the trustworthy, accountable one. I felt that I was meant to be my stepsister Sandy's backbone as she pursued her goals. Using her typical blend of authority and kindness, I heard my stepmother say, "Emily, remember to check the back of the closet, from below. If you find anything from your old school, we might be able to donate it." I sighed and moved another box in the direction of the entrance. It had been years since I had required a reminder about thorough cleanliness, but that was simply my stepmother's personality. She was unable to resist giving orders and keeping things under control. She hadn't stopped even now, while I assisted them in getting ready to move into a smaller home. My fingers touched something beneath the baseboard while I was arranging the almost empty closet. An old envelope at the back of the cupboard was a little yellowed. I knew right away. It had my name in the graceful calligraphy of my late father. I gently opened the seal and took out the letter. I was extra careful not to damage the old paper, and my hands were shaking. My heart started racing as soon as I noticed the date at the top. Only a few weeks prior to my father's death, it was written, "To Emily, my darling daughter, this message indicates that my desire has not been granted if you are reading it. I requested that your stepmother give you the $50,000 college fund that I had set up for you. To support you in pursuing your goals, that money is intended only for you. Your stepmother's preference for Sandy, which dimmed your brilliance, hurt me. I hope you can restore your genius with this money." Tears obscured the words on the page as I continued to read. A fund for college? "We don't have enough money to send you both to college," my stepmother had always insisted. They informed me that in order to pay for Sandy's schooling, I would have to work. It felt normal to me at the time, so I accepted it as my place in the family. However, there was a secret I was unaware of within that function. 5 years ago, my father and stepmother were married. I was very delighted when my father, who had reared me alone, announced his desire to be married again. It didn't last long, but I was thrilled to have a new mother and a stepsister. Sandy was the only one my stepmother looked after. I wasn't her biological child, and that was the obvious explanation. My father was aware of this as well and frequently argued with her. He would take me to places I wanted to go and apologize if they got into a fight. He died in an accident a year ago, but it seems that he was even thinking about getting a divorce. I almost became an orphan as my biological mother had already passed away. My life really turned into a nightmare at that point. I'll return to the narrative now. After reading the letter and standing in disbelief, I heard my stepmother's voice. "Emily," she said in a closer tone. I think she wanted to know why I was taking so long to get upstairs. I stuffed the note into my pocket after hastily folding it. The sound of her footsteps coming made my heart race. While my stepsister Sandy was attending her ideal school, my stepmother had concealed the existence of this letter for the past year. I took on cleaning duties in addition to working as a server at a diner. Despite witnessing this, my stepmother remained silent. I cried out, "Yes, I'm here," in a more composed voice than I had anticipated. I feigned to have discovered some old paperwork when my stepmother came in. The note in my pocket remained firmly in my palm. My stepmother had robbed me of the future my father had attempted to provide. I had changed from being a quiet, submissive daughter to the person in front of her at that time. Now that I knew the truth, I was changing completely, looking for explanations and maybe even retribution. I took a careful, final glance around my childhood bedroom. Nothing could stay the same any longer. All along, I had been oblivious to the reality concealed within this chamber. I had located it now. There was no going back. I held off on pulling out the letter until dinner time. My hands were sweaty when I set it on the kitchen table. The placemats were being meticulously arranged by my stepmother, as she always did in the evening. Sandy, my stepsister, was most likely messaging her college pals in the meanwhile. Trying to maintain my composure, I started, "While I was cleaning today, I found something interesting. A letter from my dad." My stepmother's hands remained still. There was an ear-splitting quiet. I could see the tiny tightness in her shoulders, but she didn't turn around. "It's just a letter," I said, "but it covers a college fund. He left me $50,000. Sandy looked up in amazement at those remarks. She stopped using her phone to text. My stepmother said, "Oh, my dear Emily," in a soothing, even patronizing tone. "Before he died, your father was a little perplexed. Maybe he overlooked the date on the letter, but he made a lot of promises." I retorted, "But the letter was written just 2 weeks before he died, and I could not give up. It clearly states that the money had already been set aside." "Do you really believe that?" Sandy looked at me with big eyes and a chilly voice. "Do you really believe that you have a hidden riches that your father left you? While he was at it, perhaps he also left you a yacht." My stepmother's throat cleared. "I tried our hardest for this family, as did your father. You are aware of how costly education can be, are you not? Sandy had potential, and her future needed to be supported." I was unable to contain myself after hearing those words. The scrape of the chair on the floor reverberated across the room as I sprang to my feet. "What about my potential?" I yelled. "I've been working as a cleaner and at that diner nonstop. While Sandy is allowed to pursue her goals, I have been contributing half of my wage to this household." Every time I spoke, my voice broke. My stepmother eventually said, "Stop being so dramatic," her voice rising in rage. "All of us have given up something. Sandy need items that were definitely necessary." "Well, I didn't get anything out of it." Sandy smirked sarcastically at those comments, but her grin appeared a little forced. "It's not my fault you couldn't do well in school," Sandy said. "Someone in this family had to grow and succeed." Her statements were so casually vicious that they made it difficult for me to breathe. I looked to my stepmother in the hopes that she would see the injustice and stand up for me, but she seemed composed and as like nothing had occurred. One of my father's favorite sayings came to mind at that very moment. "Pay attention to the here and now. The done is the done." I took up the letter in silence, allowing my father's words to linger in my heart. They were attempting to destroy my future after stealing it. They were going back to their regular duties, and I could see it plainly. Sandy, the family's heir apparent, and her mother, who eagerly watched her triumph. Something started to change inside of me as I observed them. It solidified into something uncompromising and determined. Softly, "You're right, Dad," I said. "The done is the done. But it's up to me what happens next." After that run-in with my family, the journey to Aunt Jody's house felt like a way to escape reality. I couldn't stand Sandy's arrogant demeanor or my stepmother's icy silence any longer. The wind chime waved softly, and the garden was overrun with weeds when I got at Jody's cottage. I had always felt comfortable and secure here. The wonderful aroma of cookies baking in the kitchen welcomed me as I opened the front door. "You found the letter, didn't you?" Jody replied, wiping her hands on her apron sprinkled with flowers while glancing at me. She spoke in a confident tone. I nodded silently, unable to speak. I felt like my voice was caught in my throat. "Please have a seat, my love. You need to know more." Jody gently persuaded me to sit down after bringing out a chair. She vanished into her study and came out a little while later with an old envelope in her hand. She set it down on the table before me. "The college fund is not the only legacy your father left behind. Letters to trustees, bank records, and even recordings of your talks with your stepmother are all present. Everything is here." My fingers began to shake as I took out the paperwork and started looking through them. Regular deposits over the years were evident in the bank accounts, much beyond the $50,000 I had been informed was the college fund. That's when I learned how much my stepmother had concealed and how well my father had prepared. According to the paperwork, all of the money was moved into a new account and used to cover Sandy's college tuition 3 months after my father passed away. According to Jody, he knew she might do something like this, her voice rising in rage. That's why he made me promise to keep copies of everything. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked, overwhelmed with perplexity and rage. "Your father told me to wait until you found the letter on your own," Jody said with a heavy sigh. "According to him, you must first be prepared to stand alone." I heard a vehicle door outside the window close at that very time. Jody and I could hear my stepmother's voice through the open window. She said she needed to talk to me about something as she was chatting with a neighbor. Jody gave my hand a firm squeeze. "If you're not ready, you don't have to face her," she whispered softly. However, I had already begun gathering and arranging the paperwork. Even though my heart was racing, I had an odd feeling of peace. Actually, it seemed like the right moment. Cy let out an exaggerated sigh, and I heard my stepmother's footsteps ascending the front stairs. My stepmother yelled my name, "Emily!" and came into the room. However, she froze, her face becoming white as she spotted the papers strewn across the table. "Is this what you were looking for?" I held up a bank statement and asked. The precise sums taken out to cover Cy's college tuition were made abundantly evident in the records. "I used this to pay for college. You were not authorized to handle it," Jod interrupted Sandy as she was about to argue. "Her money was at stake. You took it." My stepmother averted her eyes from me and spoke in a low voice. "I was planning to pay it back with my paycheck after you finished paying for Cy's master's degree." I got out of my chair with a wave of rage that I hadn't experienced in years. I learned everything I needed to know from the stillness that ensued. I saw the well-crafted wall of falsehoods she had put up start to come down. It was then that I became aware of something. My father left me more than simply cash. He had provided me with the truth and the ability to at last liberate myself. The diner's fluorescent lighting gave the place a chilly, lifeless appearance. As I methodically poured coffee into mugs during my evening shift, I experienced an odd sense of disassociation from the outside world. "How are you, Emily?" One of my coworkers, who was busy making another order next to me, worriedly said, "You look like you're about to collapse." I said, "I'm fine." But my eyes were focused on a figure that could be seen through the diner's entrance. The bell over the door jingled at that very time. Sandy entered. She was sporting a high-end coat that my stepmother had proudly given her for Christmas. I felt sick to my stomach when I saw her. Sandy glanced directly at me as she slipped into a seat at the counter. She said, "I need to talk to you." There was a touch of annoyance in her voice. "You've upset Mom," she continued. I kept quiet and kept cleaning the counter. I kept my eyes off of her. I answered, "I'm working." But Sandy went on in a quiet voice. "Mom isn't working, and the mortgage on the house is overdue. Is this what you wanted?" I eventually paused at those words and turned to face Sandy. "What are you talking about?" I said in a surprisingly composed voice that broke through the background noise of the diner. "Mom took out a second mortgage to pay for my final semester," Sandy said as she approached me. "She was counting on the income from your rent payments to cover it." My thoughts went blank in that instant. Scalding liquid splashed over my ankles when the coffee pot I was holding slid and broke on the floor, but I hardly noticed the pain. Once, twice, all those additional hours, all those shifts, and the money I had toiled so hard to obtain had vanished into Sai's schooling. My co-worker Doris showed in with a mop and started mopping the floor, saying, "Emily, take 5 minutes." I nodded as she spoke softly and headed for the break area. I accessed my banking app with shaking hands while leaning against the wall. It was there, a record of the 5 years' worth of deposits I had made into my parents' account. It was meant to be for my future and schooling, but Sandy had also been used for it. I turned to find Sandy standing there as the door softly opened. She didn't appear contrite. Instead, she added, "I understand that you're upset about Dad's money, but just stop," with a trace of annoyance in her voice. With all the power I could summon, I turned to her and said, "Stop." Sandy groaned and went on, staring me in the eyes. "Mom did it for me because I have potential. You didn't." The silent rage that had been simmering inside of me suddenly erupted. Seeing Sai's face tense for a second, I whispered, "Is that so? Or maybe you just decided that before giving me a chance." "That's unfair," I said to myself. "Stealing my future is beyond unfair." I informed Doris that I would be taking the remainder of my shift off after untying my apron. Sai's voice cried out to me, "Emily, wait!" But I didn't look back. My head was whirling. I started figuring up in my head how much money I had hidden away in another account. Although it wasn't much, it was most likely sufficient to pay for a year's worth of costs. It would cover a tiny apartment's down payment. Aunt Judd would help me work out the rest, I hoped. "Family dinner tonight. We need to discuss your attitude," my stepmother wrote on my phone, which rang in my pocket at that same moment. After staring at the message for a while, I sent a succinct response, blocking both of their phones, and said, "There's nothing to discuss. I'm moving out. I've consulted a lawyer, and you'll be held accountable for using my inheritance." I turned on the ignition and headed for Aunt Jody's place. The burden of control and deceit that had been placed on me for so long seemed to be finally easing for the first time. A vibrant and heartbreaking hope started to emerge in its stead. For the first time, I understood that retribution is about releasing oneself, not about getting even. In Aunt Jody's guest room, I sat on the bed and gazed over my phone's apartment list. As the reality dawned on me, my eyesight became somewhat blurry. This was the beginning of a new life. I had already finished renting a modest studio apartment downtown, surrounded by hurriedly packed boxes. Although it was little, I could purchase it with my diner earnings, which was plenty to begin my journey toward independence. There was a loud, persistent knock that reverberated throughout the home, just as my finger was hovering over the phone button to get in touch with the landlord regarding my move-in date. "Emily, I know you're in there," came out of my stepmother's piercing, frantic voice. Aunt Judd showed up at the front door looking severe. She firmly responded, "You don't have to talk to her." But I was already convinced. I was unable to escape this any longer after ignoring calls and messages for 5 days. The moment has come to end this. My stepmother barged in, her rage evident as Aunt Jode answered the door. Sandy hovered at the doorway, uncertain as to whether to participate in the drama or just watch it unfold like a play. However, I had a gut feeling that this was the end. With a stack of papers in hand, my stepmother continued, "I've calculated every expense we've incurred on you since you turned 18. Rent, utilities, groceries. You owe us nearly $40,000. Her voice rose. I laughed at what she said, but it wasn't a funny laugh. It was one of mixed disappointment and melancholy. My eyes were still focused on my stepmother, but my voice faltered as I said, "You're handing me a bill, branding me as ungrateful for merely existing." You stole $50,000 from me, and now you're telling me that I owe you something? The environment seemed to distort around me as I spat those words out. We invested in your future. I'm the one with more potential, my stepmother yelled back, her cheeks flushing scarlet. Everything I had been keeping inside of me spilled out as the dam collapsed. Don't you dare. Don't you dare decide from the beginning that I wasn't worth investing in. I needed a family who believed in me, just once, a family who would give me a chance. I gazed at my stepmother icily. Your so-called investment robbed me of my life. I carefully unfolded my father's letter after stealthily taking it out of my backpack. When you lied about this, I continued, pointing to the letter, was that your investment? I turned to Sandy after making eye contact with my stepmother. You used my rent money to fund your education. Have you ever stopped to think about how much I sacrificed so you could chase your dreams? Or were you too busy looking down on me from your pedestal? The room fell silent as I finished speaking. For the first time, I could clearly see both of them in that silence. Sai's arrogant feeling of superiority and my stepmother's frantic desire for control. In that instant, everything was exposed. I've already signed a lease, and I've enrolled in night classes for the upcoming semester. I took a long breath before making the composed announcement. I'm leaving. The voice of my stepmother increased abruptly. You can't do that. Keeping my composure, I said softly, I can. Dad believed in me. My stepmother said icily, okay, then leave. But don't even consider that you'll be welcomed back. I just silently gazed at my family as something inside of me clicked into place. That's fine. I don't want to have anything to do with you anymore, I said gently. I turned and started to move over Jody's house's hardwood flooring. I went toward the world that lay ahead of me, leaving behind all I believed I needed with every resounding stride. It was a hard winter rain on the day of the move. Before my stepmother froze in my bank account, I was able to take out the necessary amount using the money I had accumulated from working diner shifts. However, I had to leave my car behind since she had reported it as stolen. I stood looking at the few boxes I had packed in the vacant room of my new studio apartment. Even though I felt like I had lost everything, I had faith in myself to take the first step toward freedom and the future. Sandy's message flashed on my phone. Mom's in the hospital. She had a panic attack from the stress. I hope you're happy. I opened a package of cooking items with shaking hands and erased the message without responding. My chest began to feel increasingly uneasy. Everyone's hours had been reduced by the restaurant, and my night course's first tuition payment was due in 2 weeks. It was difficult for me to breathe since the apartment's small walls seemed like they were closing in on me. I flinched at the sound of a knock at the door. Sandy was standing when I opened the door. She appeared to be older than I have seen her before. She said, "Mom's sick," without saying hello. The bank had forced them into a second mortgage, she recounted, adding in a hushed tone, "We might lose the house." Sandy, meantime, said that she would have to leave her master's program. I grabbed the doorframe for support after the shock. I said, "That's not my fault," out of habit. Sandy took out her phone and showed me a picture of my stepmother in a hospital bed, without a word. "Dad would be ashamed of you for doing this to Mom," she said. Her remarks were like a kick to the gut. I said, "Don't you dare use Dad against me." I strained to say, "Dad wanted us to be together. Instead, you destroyed everything." But my voice broke. "When you stole my future." Sandy regretfully shook her head. "Mom gave your future to someone who could use it better." We were correct, you know. I closed the door when she finished speaking, but her words continued to reverberate in my head. The little flat had the feel of a jail. I was reminded of all I had lost by the sound of rain striking the glass. The course catalog for my night classes appeared to be mocking me from the kitchen counter, and my funds would hardly cover the rent for the following month. My phone came back to life at 2:47 a.m., and the microwave clock began to flicker. On social media, Sandy shared a picture of my stepmother in the hospital. "Some people choose revenge over family. Please pray for Mom," was the caption, and I received a barrage of criticism from friends, family, and relations. The phrase "shocked by her coldness" was used often. "How could you do this?" was written by my normally kind cousin Lisa. I held my father's letter close to my breast as I curled up on the exposed mattress. Was I mistaken? Perhaps they were correct. Perhaps I had been self-centered. Perhaps the destiny they chose for me was all I ever deserved. I was wondering why I ever believed I could get away as the rain kept beating down on the glass. I got a certified letter exactly 1 month after I moved out. It was printed on Smith Associates law firm's official letterhead. I was hesitant to open it at first, thinking it was just another ruse by my stepmother to have me go back home. However, I was astounded when I read the contents. To Ms. Smith, "It is my responsibility as Ella Mitchell's estate trustee to transmit this letter once your independent residence has been confirmed." I read some more, my hands shaking. Aside from the college fund, my father also left another account behind. It covered stock investments as well as real estate. It was more than plenty to guarantee that I could live freely and follow my own path in life. Everything was set up by my father to assist me in pursuing my own goals. The tap on the door came less than 2 hours later. My stepmother was the one. As she pushed past me to enter the apartment, she remarked, "I heard about the inheritance." Sandy trailed closely after, and they all gathered around me, erecting their customary wall of charges. "What's this all about?" Sandy smiled smugly and added, "The lawyer called us first." My stepmother responded sternly, "It wasn't just a courtesy, it was a warning. Considering your recent behavior, I'm filing to become your guardian. You're clearly unfit to manage this amount of money in your current mental state." The room seemed to spin as soon as I heard those words. I said, "You have no right to do that." My stepmother said, "I have every right, and I fully intend to," and took out a folder. Records of my alleged erratic conduct were found there, including medical records and testimonies from friends and relatives. I started looking through the meticulously arranged evidence when she pushed the folder in my direction. "You've been planning this ever since you found out about the first letter," I responded. With composure, my stepmother stated, "We're trying to protect you." But all of the details of the pattern that had confined my existence suddenly became evident. They decided I wasn't worth investing in without my permission, forcing me to return to a life where I worked until I broke, supporting Sandy's aspirations while letting mine wither and die. Now there was no denying it. I could never get my stepmother to quit attempting to crush my dreams. I held fast to my father's message and refused to back down. "If you don't leave, I'll call the police, and I'll take these documents to a real lawyer to prove that you're trying to control me again." Despite her frustrated expression, my stepmother turned slowly in the direction of the door. A final shot was sent over her shoulder by Sandy. "You'll regret this decision, Emily." I remembered my father, his meticulous preparations, and his faith in me as they made their way to the door. I had said no for the first time in my life. There was a message from Aunt Jody on my phone a year later, while I was at the university library, surrounded by textbooks and the soft murmur of students getting ready for my final exams. "Check the letter. I was cleaning out your father's old desk and found an unfinished letter he wrote just days before he passed." Unlike the other letters, this one abruptly cuts off mid-sentence. What caught my attention, though, was a book beside it. Your father's well-worn copy of Jane Eyre. He once promised to pass it on to you. If you want it, it's yours. Jody gave the book to me that night. A little envelope dropped out as I turned the yellowed pages. There was a picture inside that I had never seen before. It was a photo of my father when he was younger, holding up the key to his first apartment with pride. He had written, "Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose yourself. Now, it's your turn," on the reverse of the picture. Sandy came to mind. She had quit her master's program last week and taken a job as a waitress. I didn't respond to her one text message, but I knew what she meant when she said, "I understand now." After selling their large family home, the two of them moved into a small apartment. Their new residence consisted of a kitchen and living room, united in a single unit in an ancient building. My stepmother was now a cashier at a small neighborhood grocery, where she had begun working part-time. Her formerly refined manner was a long cry from her first work in 20 years. Both of them had to face the decisions they had made since their lives had radically changed. I could see how drastically their situation had changed, and I felt somewhat relieved that perhaps this change had taught them something. After working with the attorney my father had recommended, I was able to recover the inheritance that my stepmother had embezzled. To be sure I wouldn't have to deal with her anymore, I also secured a restraining order against her. I had an idea, as I was using my finger to draw the text on my father's letter. My stepmother had always thought that if I had problems, I would break down and then reconstruct myself the way she had intended. However, I hadn't lived up to her expectations. Rather, I had made my own way. My father had always recognized my ability, as evidenced by my first semester grades. I discovered that I was appreciated for who I was in my new surroundings. I formed a book club at the neighborhood coffee shop, and it had developed into a close-knit group of friends rather than just a pastime. They embraced and helped me because of who I was, not because of what I could provide. I had one more thing to look forward to, and next month we would be reading Jane Eyre at my recommendation. My phone buzzed once more at that moment. "Can we talk?" was the brief message that Sandy displayed on the screen, but it was obvious how she felt. I took up my dad's picture and saw his pleased smile again. I felt a new feeling of assurance when he smiled. The goal of revenge was to protect oneself, not to harm another. It was also about beginning to write your own tale instead of continuing to live someone else's. I replied to Sandy saying, "Tuesday at 2 p.m., M. Oak Street Coffee Shop." This might be a new development. Sandy could or might not have been prepared to begin her own tale. It didn't matter either way.